Welcome everyone. I am pleased to have Shenah Abdullah here. We will be starting shortly. Before I introduce Shenah, I would like to share the upcoming speakers series. So Shenah will be the first presenting for this semester's speakers series. As you can see, the next one will be on Kurdish stories from an American perspective by Zaid Brifkani, and later on will be followed by several other speakers throughout the semester for Kurdish studies. And we also have a series on critical Muslim studies too. Will be done in May by a couple of speakers. Shenah Abdullah is currently the chair of the Department of Social Sciences at Kurdistan Institute for Strategic Studies and Scientific Research in Slemani. She received her PhD from the University of Exeter's Center for Kurdish Studies in anthropology, focusing on the people of Slemani. And she also is the director of the program for, I believe, Rosa Luxemburg's, focusing on the food safety. And she has been doing research through this funding, I believe, that you received from Rosa Luxemburg's for a while, and she will be presenting on her research results, focusing on food safety and food sovereignty in Slemani and surrounding areas. It is a really interesting topic that we discussed before with Shenah when I was in Slemani. I was really interested and I wanted to you hear about it too. So welcome, Shenah. You can go ahead and put your presentation on.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Metin, and I welcome everyone. I really appreciate there is a good crowd, so I'm grateful and for your time and for being with us. So I will share. First, I just wanted to share briefly share the video that there's a short film that we made, which is the result of our project. The title is "Lay Your Tired Hands on Stomach," which is from a Kurdish proverb, "Desti mandule serski tere." So without further ado, I'll play a bit, just a minute or so of the film that we produced, which is a short film, and then we can go into the presentation. Sorry, it was rendering before as well because of the internet connection.
والله بنعمل إنما أنا رخص مكتب يعني كثنا قلت مكتب لدواء أوج إتر هر خريج فلاحته هنا أنا بقول أنا كأمانة هنا أمانة ولا دول أمانة هنا كان يحوس إنت والله الرزالات ما زوج كشوا دروا ما كردوا بباوش فوش ما آخر كردوا إنت قرب الرجال ما كردوا بعربانة هنا وما نتوا قرب الرجال زود بعربانة دوري هنا ما نتوا كتامانه فاك ما كردوا نسك معنا بورني معنا توبة دزنوك معنا بو فاقل معنا بو يستان معنا بو حمشتك معنا بو لدش ترقشتي خريشي بودا بياوجن وكي خريكم نكر بلا بياو إشتكم ئافرەتی ئیشێ کرد تاژوی پیاوی کاتی هەموو شتێکیان کردووە دروێنەی کردووە جێرەی کردووە کێشەی کردووە ڕزیان بڕیوە ڕزیان چێڵاوەتیان هێناوەتەوە ئەوان هەموو لەگەڵ کردووە
زراعتی ناودێمانە کرد بەخچەمانە کەمات و خێرمانە کرد دەوبەتەنگەی لە پەرەگەرمی کردمانە لە پەڕەجێ کردمانە لە میسک کردمانە لۆ کردومانە هەمووشمان بەیەکەوە کردووە
أنا من العريب هنا شلون لباب كذا
كاكب إنسان كبيجي هذا المشروع القيادي
نخوش
كسر ديبي اللي أبي بخوي مش ودي هذي
نخوش ببابي من نخوش بكلاس بيتو أركان سر من بهم بعد هموش تقال لدس يو في يوتيوب درينا مرداري وهموش تقلوا في أربعة شيء جوان ويسي ولا حتى في ده جوان روزاني في ده جوان مرداري في ده جوان
will be available and you can share also the link so it can be watched. I will go through the presentation. You could bear with me. I wanted you to see. Wanted you to see a bit of the film in order to be able to relate a little bit to what I say about the oral history later on. And some photographs of these brilliant farmers will come up in the presentation. So the title of the presentation is Food Sovereignty and Local Farmers' Oral Traditions. And as Mamusa, Dr. Metin said, it is part of an oral history project that is shared between the Kurdistan Institute and Rosa Luxemburg Foundation Beirut office. And it's this work is for several years that I've been working on since 2003, summer of 2023, sorry, and it continues on. And we've learned a lot through this oral history project. I'm originally from Slemani, and so growing up as a child, I always heard about farmers' lives of, for example, my father always spoke in linguistically using terminologies that were related to farming, agriculture, by using proverbs, and also telling us stories. And so these are things that we grew up with as children. And later on, when I studied anthropology, of course, and I returned, I started doing field work for my master's degree and then for my PhD. And I became more and more interested in oral history and oral traditions, because no matter what topic you work on while doing fieldwork, people always bring up stories of when they were farmers, when they were foragers, when they were shepherds. So whether they speak about economy or politics or everyday lives, they always related it to this kind of traditions that were shared between rural and urban areas. So there's a period, I will go into this later on, in Iraq's history where this separation becomes much more advanced, where the rural and the urban lifestyles separate. But to the large part of our history, these traditions were shared both within urban and rural areas. So I talk about food sovereignty and a bit about agricultural heritage, and then the interventions that were happening throughout different periods in Iraq. Of course, I touch on them briefly because of the presentation time. I also touch on this topic a little bit in the archives. So because I am currently writing the oral history study, it's a short study that I'm writing of this fieldwork that we have been doing for the past 2.5, 3 years now. In order to relate to what people are telling us in their stories, I also had to look through the archive because there's a lot of topics that have been talked about, but it needs further examinations within the archives, and this is why I go into the archives. Then I also the kind of work that I'm doing is a bit into decolonization. It's also sharing and including stories of local peoples and communities that are otherwise not heard and understudied, of course. And I also, for all of us as researchers, we always tend to cite sources, printed sources, even within archival sources, that are less of ordinary people. And my aim is to include also the stories of farmers and people as primary sources. I mean, that's the kind of work that we are trying here in Kurdistan, and of course, part of my story. And by food sovereignty, I think the definitions of why is it important. Just use the definition by La Via Campesina, which is one of the strongest movements here globally that works in farmers' rights, but also rights of people to clean food, access to culturally appropriate food, but food that is produced ecologically without exploitation of the land and also the rights of people. So in a nutshell, is people having the right and access to land, to water, to resources, and also to seeds, which is becoming more and more difficult, not only in Kurdistan, but globally. Heirloom seeds, traditional seeds are no longer in the hands of farmers. They're in the hands of big corporations that are monopolized, but also patented. When seeds are patented, farmers are no longer able to have access to them. And so the picture on the right is one of the female farmers that I've recorded her stories, stories relating to agriculture. But as you see in the picture, there's, maybe it's not visible, but there's a lot of sacks of wheat that this family has been gathering through the years, and they plant these seeds over and over again. Unfortunately, they're not heirloom seeds. They're not the traditional local seeds that were carried on or preserved for thousands of years. These are imported seeds. I'll get into this a little bit later on, where seeds were introduced in Iraq and they were imported. But nevertheless, what she holds in her hands, traditionally women were the guardians of seeds. They were the seed savers, and they saved it in fabrics, whatever pieces of clothes they had in the house, rather than in sacks or...
Shenah, can you put your presentation on, please? The presentation, I think you were talking about the presentation.
It's not on?
Yes, we cannot
no.
see what you're talking about. So
Yeah, it's the video that is on, so...
Sorry, I shared the presentation. 1 second. Let me stop share again. Because I switched and... Are you able to see now?
No.
Not
no,
yet.
we see you.
Okay, 1 second. I have to share again, 1 second. Are you able to see now?
It's still the screen, yeah. It's still, yeah, why don't you expand the... yeah, great. Do it again.
Okay. I didn't know you were not able to see all this time. Okay.
Yeah, now it's fine. Now it's fine.
This is the photographs I was speaking about. So the woman on the right is the female seed saver that I was speaking about. And also there's a definition from La Via Campesina of food sovereignty. The picture on the left is one of the farms that we visited and recorded. This is Dere village in Sharbajer. It's one of the best areas in Kurdistan for access to land and water resources. Farmers are still able to plant, to have access to water. Large parts of the land are still available to farmers, and the land is really fertile and rich. So these are certain areas that we are working with farmers to also, we exchange knowledge, but we also try to convince them to stay away from using pesticides and chemicals, because they have all the right resources and they don't need to use these. Now, of course, you know, the archaeological findings in Iraqi Kurdistan are becoming more and more. And one of the recent discoveries is Bestansur, which is about 30 kilometers from Slemani. And a group at the University of Reading in UK, Dr. Wendy and Roger Matthews, have been working here for many years now. But Bestansur is an area where they found evidences of established agricultural traditions, farming, and also they're finding pottery and silica. So this was one of the early areas in Kurdistan where food was produced, especially grains actually were planted and harvested and the seeds were saved. So this is a tradition that goes back for thousands of years, and farmers carried on this tradition. Most of you are aware of Henny Hansen's work in Iraqi Kurdistan, a Danish anthropologist who came and during the building of the Dukan Dam, where she came with the engineers. And although Hansen recorded stories of women, the daughters of Allah, as you know, or some of you know, her book, her ethnographic book, but she also, some of the photographs that she took, this is actually an area close to Dukan, Topzawa. And here she's recorded photographs of farmers who've actually, until the time that she's here, until the late 50s, farmers were using very basic tools in agriculture, very much carried on from these historic periods of plowing the land with animals and using very minimal tools. But of course, Hansen, when she's writing about women, she also predicts that this lifestyle, because of Western interventions and because of the monarchy period, that they would slowly fade and disappear or not go on as they used to in the past. As you saw in the film, one of the farmers, this is a farmer from Haladin village in Surdash region. And so this is a photograph that she's very proud, he's very proud of showing us this photograph of himself plowing the land. And this is a mountainous area, and they're well known for their grapevines. And when I asked him about farming, also in the short bit in the film, you saw that he relates it to his ancestral traditions that his father taught him how to do it. And the work was beautiful work. And to him, farming is a way of life. It is their life. And these are the kind of quotes and information that we're getting. And from this, I also look into the archives because they're touching on periods and events that affected their lives and the agricultural traditions that they carried on. And this makes me go back to the records. And primarily, I don't go back to Ottoman period. The periods that I focus on is the British colonial period, early British colonial period, and also direct and indirect, and in the monarchy period. So Wilson and Bell, of course, in their review of the civil administration of Mesopotamia, speak about the report that comes from Soane in Slemani, and they touch on tobacco. They, of course, before them, Mark Sykes, also in 1901, speaks about the potential of agriculture in Kurdistan. And they remind their colonial government that agriculture could be something that they could tune in, as they did in India. And from then on, agriculture becomes important. And there are two crops that I call commodity crops. One is cotton and the other is tobacco. So they bring seeds, and seeds are being imported from very early on, if you look at it in the records. Tobacco, cotton first, and then tobacco second. And this also makes me examine the newspapers, early newspapers and magazines, especially of the propaganda newspapers that were produced by the British, for example, Tegishni Rasi and Peshkoten. And it's very interesting when you read these archives, and they touch on agriculture. And from very early on, there's a need of improving and advancing agriculture, of teaching farmers how to do more efficient, productive agriculture in order to bring revenues for the British government, and the internal government in Iraq. And so, I mean, I don't do close-up of these snippets of the newspapers because it will take time, but each of these issues that I have brought up here have interesting things to say about tobacco, for example, tobacco production, why children, women, and men need to put their efforts together in the villages, why equipment should be brought in, and help advancement in agriculture. Fast forward, of course, this issue, earlier pages of the issue that I showed you is from 1921. In 1921, of course, you know, the delegation of Mesopotamia meet in Cairo. Bell is there, Churchill is there, and others, and they always report, of course, here, there are no representative of the Kurds at the time, but they speak a lot about Kurdistan and what needs to be done in Kurdistan in relations to Iraq, of course. It's always as part of Iraq, incorporation of Kurdistan in Iraq. And in some of Bell's letters to her father, although she's not very much interested in Iraq, in Kurdistan per se, but there are things that come up in her letters that I also examined, reading between the lines what they mean, especially pertaining to economy. Again, a photograph from Henny Hansen's book, and here there's this is a field again close to Dukan because there's still a lot of water while they're building the dam, and the production is high, especially of rice and the grains, and these are farmers using very minimal tools. But agriculture is the main source of people's life and of economics as well. Now fast forward a bit more, this is the tobacco magazine that was produced in the 1940s and later on 50s. It's from 1948, it's about importing chemicals, again, really related to tobacco, to enhance tobacco production, but also to treat illnesses in tobacco. They're importing chemicals from Europe to treat illnesses. And then ghee. Naturally, people were using animal ghee before this, and then products from outside become produced in the markets and people are buying it. And in the oral stories that I'm collecting, elder farmers say when this oil comes in, people don't buy it, they don't trust it because they think it makes them ill. By and by, people are, I don't know what to call it, but by and by, advertisement becomes more and more in magazines and in everyday lives, and people become accustomed to them and they use them. This is again from the At-Tabukh magazine, or the tobacco magazine, and these are, so they go into the rural areas. Villagers are mainly told to produce tobacco in large areas of Kurdistan, especially in the Slemani region. They need more tobacco to be produced, and later on there's a tobacco factory that is established in Slemani. And people are photographs with their tobacco on sheets, and they teach them how to dry them and how to cure them, and later on in the factories. Again, book magazine. On the right is from the, and it says, enjoy the until Iraqi tobacco, which again is mainly. And in the middle one is a sketch of how farmers are actually doing this in the villages. And the last picture is the tobacco factory in Slemani, where mainly villagers who are more and more migrating in the cities and they work in the factories. That one is from 1972. And the best tobacco, the type of tobacco that is produced is El Jumhuriya, which is produced in Slemani, and it's being exported outside, so it's sold in Europe and other areas around the world. That's the picture on the right, and on the left is the statistics from all the new labs and curing sites that are opened all over Iraq, especially in Kurdistan, to produce this type of tobacco, to clean it, and the numbers are all there. And so in every issue of this magazine, there's a focus on Slemani governorate and what they were doing and what they were producing, along with Nineveh and Kirkuk as well. And then it becomes part of poetry, literature. So you have writers talking about tobacco, writing about tobacco. This is a poem by Mirza Muhammad Amin Mangori. Lots of people know Mangori in Kurdistan for his writings about women. But here he actually speaks about tobacco. It's a popularization of the crop itself, but the poem itself is very beautiful. And he speaks of the plant itself as a woman, as the parts of the tobacco, the leaves are praised as parts of a woman, would be which he's famous for. So it's a very beautiful poetry, and so more and more I do research, I find that writers are also introduced, the same writers, some of whom were writing in Peshkoten and some in Tegishni Rasi are later on talking about tobacco in the magazines. So in Iraq, there are a lot of interventions that are happening during the British colonial period, during the monarchy, and later on during consecutive Iraqi governments from the Ba'athists and later on. And these interventions lead to industrialization, of course, and developments in the Kurdistan, so I mainly talk about Kurdistan. The building of Shenah factory, of the tobacco factory, and of the cement factories. And each of these bring with them shifts in lifestyle, but also rural to urban migrations. Lots of people migrated to the city from the rural areas, including my father as a young boy who came, he didn't live far away from Slemani, but he then as a young boy came and worked in the factories and later on established his life in Slemani. And so this is how the cities become bigger, but also how the industry itself is growing and who affects it and the interventions that are happening. I will here pause a little bit for you to reflect on this history, and then I bring you back to the present of the oral history study and the ethnographic work that I'm doing with farmers. Who are these farmers and why in the Slemani government we work with them? So the oral history study here, where I'm interested in documenting oral traditions and histories of farming communities, especially in the Slemani governorate, and now we're heading into the Halabja government, which is a government of itself now. And these areas, as I mentioned before, are early areas of agricultural traditions archaeologically, but also within Iraq's economy. These were the backbones of Iraq's economy for production of grains and also, as I mentioned, commodity crops that were influencing the Iraqi economy, especially within agriculture. And I use ethnographic methodology, but also I really work with visual anthropology, which means I document the stories visually. I record them, but we also do filming with full consent of everyone who wants their stories to be shared, of course. For those who don't want to participate visually, then we respect that and ethically work with these stories. The areas again are Slemani governorate and Halabja governorate. So we're in Sharbajer, Sharazu, we're now in the Raqarin area, Qaladze and Pijder, and also in Germian and Chamchamal, Kalar. We haven't gone to Kirkuk yet, but hopefully these areas will be open for us in the future. And we're also in Qaradakh. So each region, it's very important to remember that each region has its own particular history of what they were planting, what they were producing, and how also they were affected by interventions, whether they're on the Iran-Iraq border or in the middle or central or closer to the Iraqi borders. So the stories differ. Yeah, interesting stories, but also specific stories that relate to events and political and economic interventions. I do admit that that a lot of these stories are of people who are very resilient, who've remained in their lands despite the wars, the crises, the atrocities, and things that have been happening to them. They kept rooted in their lands. And some of the things that we hear, for example, from this female farmer, that despite the Anfal campaign, despite all the wars that were happening in Haladin area, they remained. They were exiled, they were kicked out, but they returned to be resilient and produce food, even at the very later part of their lives. I mean, some of these farmers are old, but they continue back-breaking work in their lands because it is their identity, it's their traditions, but it's also resilience for them. I mean, I've spoken a bit about who works, who's involved in the Oral History Project, the Rosa Luxemburg and Kurdistan Institution. But another topic that it's very important for me to work on, and it's close to my heart, is this documentation of seed sovereignty or seed traditions. So where were saving seeds, how they were keeping them, how they were saving them, and what has happened to seeds. There's a lot of stories of seeds. Why did they disappear? Who was influencing the disappearance of seeds? For example, some of you have heard about the US interventions in Abu Ghraib, the so-called burning of Abu Ghraib seed bank. And in Kurdistan, there isn't really a clear answer of what has happened and why seeds have disappeared or where they have gone to. But these are stories that come up in our conversations, in our interviews, and people touch on certain topics that are important to document with the farmers, but also within the archives. And as I said, something that I also focus on is the empowerment of farmers. So farmers as primary custodians of knowledge and their traditions, and farmers that have stood the test of time and also the troubles that face them all their lives. And it's traditions they're very proud of, that is part of their identity and well-being as well. You know, the food that they produce makes them happy, but also makes them healthy and well. Along with seeds and food, we also, I mean, they naturally come up in the stories without me searching for them or focusing on them. We also find craftsmanships and crafts that some of the villagers were doing along with agriculture. They were doing crafts, like this is one of our female protagonists who's in the film, who is also very good in pottery making. And in Pejder area, this is Hero district in Pejder, female women were the guardians of these traditions, and they were the ones who taught generations after them, and it continues. To make pottery, and this pottery were used for saving food, that, you know, because they were sustainable, and clay, as you know, is more natural and sustainable. So it kept the food safe for much longer. Also water, for example, exchange of crafts. So in Pejder, they exchange their pottery with people in Germian in their grain. So grain for pottery, and the pottery that was taken to Germian kept the water cool, and it saved them in the summer. So we visually record this, and it's part of films and different aspects of visualizations that we use along with writing articles and the study. We also have visual productions. We also have a podcast. Last year, we did some podcasts on the stories of the farmers. This is a female farmer from, and she speaks about different traditions of when the women were the best climbers in the oak trees for picking gall, which is part of a certain species of oak tree that was sold to Europe in the past for as dye, because it produced a yellow dye. It was exported to Europe, but also to Iran. And so we collect these stories, we share them, we make them accessible for also the new generation to learn about this history, as unfortunately our new generation, like elsewhere around the world, are less and less hearing about these their ancestors' stories, and their attention is elsewhere, not on these stories. So we're trying to reanimate these stories and make it part of everyday culture. So these are some photographs of our project, what is produced where, and what it still continues, what kind of seeds are available, kind of traditions where, and the struggles, but also achievements of farmers we are recording in their own words, of course. And again, seed sovereignty is something that we encourage and we speak about a lot, and we look for seeds that are still heirloom seeds that are still available in these villages. Something else that we are doing, we're not just getting knowledge, we're also sharing knowledge and exchanging knowledge. So the farmers become, we produce trainings and workshops where I bring the farmers, of course, with their consent, and we help them. We bring them to academic settings, to the cities, to the schools, where they become speakers themselves, instead of having an academic, which we are normally used to. We also have the farmers as the knowledge givers, as people who are sharing and are giving advice, but also that they're sharing their stories and teaching us about what was there. This female farmer is a forager, also sort of like a medicinal medicine woman, talks about the uses of the traditional crops and weeds and grasses that were used for illnesses, how they were used for treatments. And she's very knowledgeable, and the kind of knowledge that herbalists around the world are speaking about and also shared here. But we don't hear about them unless we make them visible and allow them to speak to us. Again, this picture is from their village, families who still stay on the land. Unfortunately, the story is like elsewhere around the world, that the farmers that remain are elderly. They're no longer able to produce the amount of food that they were producing because they're older and less able. And the younger generations have left, migrated to the cities in search of better jobs and education. But we're encouraging more discussions in the villages with our trainings. We also give training in the village, inviting the young members of the families back, and we have discussions of why people have left and what can we do to help the elderly farmers with their struggles. Traditionally, how seeds were saved, as you see in the picture on the right, in fabrics, as I said, somewhere in the ceiling or some spot in the house, but they were really sacred to people. It was part of their main identity, because when you had seeds, it means that next year you had food that you could eat, but also share. And we shared the seeds as well. So seeds were exchanged between farmers for free, between village and communities. And we want to speak more and more about this in opposition to what companies and large corporations want to do now, which is to patent seeds. More stories of our presentations. We also have events that we call the public, the media, and the farmers to exchange the knowledge and have them speak in their own words and answer questions when they're able to come. And some of the heirloom seeds, for example, this tomato on the right is one of the farmers in Qaradagh who luckily still has a good variety of Kurdish tomatoes. Now, if you smell this tomato and taste it, the elderly always, if I bring it to an elderly in the city, they would say, "Where did you get this tomato? I recognize this," you know. They smell it and they taste it. And they say, "For many years, I've never eaten a tomato like this." And that makes me happy. We know that the seeds are actually, with the seeds come memory, and so they're old. And they're, when I say old, pre-1990s, because after the Kurdish uprising, Raparin, a lot of these seeds disappeared because of the introduction of imported seeds F1 seeds, genetically modified, and so on and so forth in Kurdistan. Yeah, again, we share short stories of the farmers. For example, this farmer from Germian talks about the effects of interventions of the Ba'athist regime on their area in Bani Maqand. How everyone, because of the Anfal campaign, they were forced out of their land. Some of their men were killed and disappeared. And their area it was called preventable areas. No one could live in these areas for many years until 1991. But luckily, these farmers have returned and their lands are very beautiful. We report these areas where people have returned and their luscious lands and they produce agriculture. A story that I would not get into here because I think I'm heading to the end of the presentation, close to the final time, is industrial agriculture, which comes out in the film section of our film is about industrial agriculture, the opposite of what our ancestors were doing in the past until prior to the 80s is then after 91 is the introduction of pesticides and chemicals that are widespread in Kurdistan that are causes of a lot of chronic illnesses, including cancer. And this farmer is from Bazian region, and Bazian is really devastated. It's a devastated area. It's all greenhouses, production of farming mostly is in greenhouses, which means uses of a lot of poisonous pesticides that are not allowed elsewhere around the world, but are imported in Iraq. Bayer, for example, and other companies, Syngenta, what they cannot sell in Germany and not allowed by law is brought in Iraq and Kurdistan, and farmers are using it without any discretion, without any knowledge of what they are. In fact, sometimes these the active ingredients we don't know. I mean, even when we search them and we bring trainers from outside, the active ingredients are not visible. They're not written. Therefore, farmers don't know what they're using, and they don't know why they're ill. And we all eat from this food, so that's another thing that we're working on. Reminding everyone of what you did in the past was ecological, was sustainable, and why we need to combine some of these traditions with new agroecological and permacultural methods that are used now to save our communities from chronic illnesses, death, and dying as well, and also make people celebrate their ancestral culture and traditions. More clips and videos, but also of our film screenings. So now we have 2 films produced. We show the films in academic settings, in public setting, in the villages themselves. For example, the picture on the right is at the agricultural extension, which is part of the agricultural directory. The extension workers are the engineers, are the ones who go to the villages. Unfortunately, the kind of advice they give is on industrial agriculture, use of chemical weapons. Sorry, it is actually like chemical weapons, chemical pesticides. And so we show them the photographs and videos of the farmers and traditional farming, and it kind of excites them, and we get conversations going with why we should do this more. And the picture on the left is in Dere village, the film that we produced of the farmers themselves, we shared with them. And it makes them very happy and very proud of themselves, that people are watching them, relating to their stories, asking them questions. We also provide them with trainings. Of course, all of these thanks to the Rosa Luxemburg Beirut office, but also with support from the Kurdistan Institute. We bring external and internal trainers, and we provide trainings to the farmers in sustainable methods, along with their knowledge, of course. We combine, sometimes they correct us and they say, this is not right, it doesn't work for us. So then we incorporate their knowledge and traditions in order to enhance the trainings. And we provide this at the university for the academics, students, and lecturers at the College of Agriculture in Slemani. And something new that we are doing with our partner organization in Slemani is providing alternative markets for only clean, non-chemically produced food from the farmers themselves. So the farmers and small producers come in the market themselves, bring their fruits, and they sell it to the public. And people are very eager to buy clean food in this world of largely commodified industrial production like this world. And there's a forthcoming study that I'm working on, which brings all this talking about into a short study with photographs, with quotations from the farmers, with a bit of the archival history as well. And then we will make this accessible as well. So these are some of our, from the Rosa Luxemburg Stift in Beirut office Instagram page, some of our outputs so far, some of the things that I mentioned, the videos, the events, yeah, the film screenings and the podcasts, and also we did a graphic novel and pesticide study. And more of this work is being shared and heard about alongside with articles that we're writing. And I think that brings us back to the end of the presentation. So thank you for your time and patience with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Shenah. That was great. Really, I enjoyed. Now I understand much better than the point you made it when I was there, saying that our food has been poisoned by a variety of, factors. Now we are at the Q&A session. So if you have your questions, you are welcome either to pose your question on the chat if you're so shy not to, speak or show your face, or you're welcome just to raise your hand, and I'll be happy to have your question right away. Maybe while waiting for other questions, I can have the first ice-breaking question for you. So it's really interesting that you are turning this research also into action, as I see that you are sharing your, results with the common people, farmers, as well as the academics, and bring them together too. I don't know how much does this affect the also agricultural policies in the region too by the institutions that are implementing. I don't know, you talked about the governorship of the Slemani was also involved with. So, I mean, we academics always talk about the impact factor in academia, but how much it's impacting, I mean, what is your observation about the impact of your result, your research? I'm hoping that not right away, probably in the next 5 years, 10 years, will have a higher impact too, in some sense. I mean, in terms of reviving the traditional farming as well as, the traditional seeds that will come to life.
Yeah, thanks, Metin. Actually, I mean, so far, for example, the governor of Slemani, Dr. Habal Abu Bakr, is very understanding himself when he attends our events. He's been, we invite them often to our events because of his personality, because of his understanding, his academic background. He is understanding and he's welcoming of these events, trainings, and he even encourages the farmers. For example, when he meets with the farmers, he values their work, he comes to the markets, he buys their products. But when it comes to, so we are having impact. So far, I think I can say the impacts are on ordinary people's level, but also on institutional level, like the agricultural department. So it's going into the academic circles as well, and the NGO civil society circle. As for government recognition, as I said on the Slemani governorate, yes. But for example, our aim is to reach the Ministry of Agriculture. This is the impact that I want to to have conversations with them. We're actually in negotiation in relations with them now to have an appointment to go visit them and speak about policy. I mean, I think I would be very happy when things get into policy, not directly changing policies, but at least having conversations of why there needs to be regulations about what enters Kurdistan seed-wise and chemical-wise and quality control, for example. And then there are really good laws within the Iraqi constitution, the Kurdish constitution regarding agriculture, but they're not being implemented. So we can also ask why laws are not being implemented and what we could do as academics. So mixing of circles of farmers, academics, of stakeholders, NGOs, and the government. The more and more we gather and we speak, I think the more impact we can have together.
Okay, great. Well, let's have some questions from the chat. Sarah's question was if it was part of your PhD. I don't think so. Your topic on PhD was something else, as I remember, but related to it.
Yeah. I think it was always something that I was doing. For example, I was working on effects of interventions during different periods. So I was always looking at the archival period of the British colonial. Now, in that, some of the findings were touching on agriculture, but at the time I wasn't focused on agriculture. But I know that I had set things aside. It was always in the back of my mind. But in fact, I was always interviewing people, and a lot of the elderly always touched on agriculture. So when I returned to those interviews, I find bulks of information that were related to seeds, food, what we did in the village, what we did in the cities, in the, in different quarters in Slemani. We were producing this and that with our village friends coming and going. So it was always there, but it wasn't directly on agriculture. If that answers your question.
Great. A question from Mujahid Bilici. If local native seeds are lost, where do the farmers procure their seeds? What countries or companies such as Monsanto do they rely on for the seeds?
Yeah, as I said, unfortunately, the more and more we go to different communities, we're finding that heirloom seeds, by heirloom seeds, we mean seeds that have been produced traditionally by farmers, open pollinated without genetic modifications or interventions from, from companies or labs. These seeds, I can say we have largely lost them as other areas in the world, but much more so in Kurdistan. But I think we are still in the middle of our study. I cannot speak for all of Kurdistan. Like, I'm hoping that if we go to more remote areas, we might find seeds traditions or seed varieties. We found some, but they're very minimal. And where they're getting it from. So when I was interviewing people, the story is always we lost them in 1991, right? With the Kurdish uprising. But in fact, while reading the archives, I see that, as I said, seeds were brought in Iraq and Kurdistan from much early on, like 1940s, or even if we dig into the archives, we can find much earlier than that as well. And the seeds now, post 80s, because of the Iran-Iraq war, Iraq brought a lot of food, imported food and seeds because of the war, chemicals and so on and so forth, mainly from Europe and the US after 1991 and 2003. Oil for Food program brought with it a lot of NGOs and imported seeds from Australia, from the US, from Europe, and now from, of course, Bayer bought Monsanto, so a lot of the seeds in markets in Kurdistan are from China, from ChemChina, from Syngenta, from Bayer, from lots of other areas in Europe. And whatever is not sold and forbidden in other parts of the world are unfortunately dumped into our regions.
I imagine that, I mean, considering Shanidar's, the cave, the findings there, they were able to recover some of the pollens from, the remaining these people. Why not be able to find the seeds that were 30, 40, 50 years ago around there? So I'm sure if people really, they are resilient and they determined, they would be able to recover, as we see, good examples from other countries. You can easily see that, especially for tomato, variety of tomato seeds have been recovered. Now people are, taken over the markets that was dominated by more artificial ones. Now it seems that some countries are really keen about that. So I'm sure Kurdistan wouldn't be an exception to that. Well, the next question is from Serdar Amin. What is the future of Kurdistan's agriculture? Is Kurdistan going to be self-sufficient for food and other products? And then next, Babar.
Answer then both of your questions. I'm very hopeful, not pessimistic actually. I'm very hopeful, and we've started. I mean, not I, but everybody's. As I said, farmers are resilient, and the more we search, the more we find really good and interesting stories, very positive stories of seed traditions, some seeds that were left and saved. We just need to encourage farmers to plant them again, increase them, and save them in the right way. And not rely so much on imported seeds, because there's I'm going to use a term that farmers don't usually like when we speak, and it's this kind of brainwashing of farmers, brainwashing of all of us, of whether it is marketing. Ours is better, Western techniques, Western seeds, company seeds are better, please buy them, use them. And it was done through the agricultural institutions, the engineers, the local engineers who were trained and told to do this, and they went and told the farmers. And we can reverse this. I mean, we can reverse this by just making the farmers speak. What did you do 30 years ago? Well, how did you take care of your village and your community? And you were very happy, you were healthy, you were sufficient, largely. Of course, farmers were poor. We were not romanticizing this. They were not kings or queens, but they were very happy. They always say we were happy. We were eating from our own labor, our own hands. And my tomato tasted much better than the 100 kilos that we get in the market. One tomato, they compare it to 100 kilos. So it could be done. We just need all of us to work and be with the farmers, and because farmers are neglected, they're really tired, they are alienated. So they need support, and they need everyone's support, and they need to also be taken into consideration and account. And that's the kind of empowerment that we do. The more we bring them out and let them speak, the more they value themselves and the work they do, and their children, the younger generation, they see their grandpa and their grandmother or grandfather speaking, they're just like, wow, we didn't know this, So it's a collective effort that we can all do together.
Good. Babar has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation, Shenah. It was very interesting to know that a very knowledgeable area called Kurdistan exists in the world. That is also sad to know that the knowledge is disappearing somehow because of, I don't know, some factors. It seems like the lifestyle has changed, maybe also because of the climate change, that people are not interested anymore in doing or like sticking to the old authentic knowledge that they used to have before. And I can also see from the photos that most of the people that you have photographed and probably interviewed are also elderly people. So the new generation are not actually involved or engaged in this activity. I was just thinking about other knowledges that we have we had in the region, like tattooing in Kurdish was almost disappearing, but it got reclaimed by the youth. And now it is a very big thing in Turkey, mostly in Kurdistan there. I was thinking, have you observed any activities, events, or initiations by institutions or even individuals to bring back this knowledge to the society in different, structures? It could be, I don't know, because pottering that you showed is very cool and something nice to do for the young people as well. And also it could be also in the form of small area of gardening close to the top towns that people live. It could be a kind of common space for people to share. And have you seen anything like that in Iraqi Kurdistan? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. As I said, I'm very hopeful. I would say that the recent events, I think there's an awakening, as you know, in all parts of Kurdistan because of the recent events in Rojava. And some of the things that you say are way before Rojava, like the tattooing and some of the things which were also happening in Iraqi Kurdistan. But I think currently there's an awakening that if war or crises happen around us, how do we cope? How do we take care of ourselves? And food is the weaponization of food is a major topic all over the world. How food has been weaponized, for example, in Palestine and other areas in the region, in Lebanon, and now in Syria. And so I think, unfortunately, with crises and events, we awaken. It should be before that, but now we are awakened. I think youth here in Iraqi Kurdistan I hope it's not temporary. There is an awakening at the moment, and for the last 3 weeks or so, and I think we can use this energy correctly. And then this is something that I always do. I'm a lecturer, and so at the university I speak with my students, and we have conversations around these things and say, what if something happens? How can your computer and mobile and internet save you? How can AI save you? Are you going to eat technologies when food is no longer available? And so we're having conversations and awakenings, and with it, of course, trainings and practices. I think we need to be together. We need to be in the farms. We're inviting children of these older farmers that you say who stay in the villages alone, and they're tired, they're fed up. But when we bring the younger generation with us in the training, sometimes I have to work so hard to convince them to just take them in the car and take them with me. But we do. There's a fight going on. It's a good fight. We convince them to return, at least for the training, at least for the film screening. You can go back later. But some are being convinced, but it's hard work and it's slow. And I think I cannot do it alone. And this is why I'm always reaching out to my colleagues and friends around us. And it has to be a collective effort. We can do this. I believe that we can do it, especially when they come and taste the food and they see the traditions. They're convinced. And with this female farmer, the poet pottery that you mentioned, she's the only woman, along with an elder woman, who are able to do this in the village, unfortunately, in the district. So I am trying to organize a training for her where she can convince the younger women. They're not interested now, but we can convince them. I think we have to find ways to get them into the training so they can learn, so this tradition is not lost. One final thing I would say, Iraqi Kurdistan has been Americanized, since 1991, not 2003. We are an Americanized culture, and our lifestyle is very much consumerism and comfort, and people don't want to work. They don't want to be in the village, not in the city, not in the village. But because of the current economic hardships, lack of salary, people are more and more convinced that they need to be self-sufficient, whether it's in agriculture or any other topic. We need to find other ways to live on.
All right. Well, Ihsan have a couple of questions. One of them is if there's any transitional exchange and connections in Kurdistan on reviving agricultural traditions. And I think agricultural autonomy he means too, or, food autonomy, self-sufficiency, you name it. I mean, second question from him is any literature recommendation on agricultural projects in Rojava? And finally, is there any systematic research on Kurdish women's knowledge on herbal medicine?
It's written here. I'm going to look at it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
each
That's
one is a
okay.
question for a PhD study, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Translation, exchange, and connections. Good answer. Yeah, I mean, I travel also with our film screening. So I was recently in Berlin and in Beirut, and I have plans if things work out also in Rojava, hopefully. There are connections with Rojava. We're not in direct conversations, but of course there are initiatives in Rojava on sustainable agriculture, and the Genoir village and other examples that they have. Of course, with all the hardships that are going on right now, we don't know what it means for the future. But we are connecting on some levels, and we're trying to do some exchange together. So that's about Rojava. And when I was in Germany, we met collectives. Actually, there were German youth who were very connected to the Rojava experiment, especially with agriculture. And so they were giving us recommendation, but also numbers and contacts that we get in touch with. So I'm in the process of actually doing this because I think it's very important that we learn from each other's examples as well. Any systematic research on Kurdish women's knowledge in herbal medicine? Not really, no. But I want to. There's so much that I can do, but I'm finding that foraging, for example, for women foragers, herbal medicinal women were a large part of our traditional knowledge base, and so. Some of the women that I interview, maybe in the future we would do more focused studies with these women, and also maybe film projects and educational videos, because people are now again interested and not alternative to Western medicine that is not working so well. People are chronically ill. They're turning into herbal medicine and herbal treatments, and so I think it becomes more and more important that we also touch on these topics, but there isn't really on institutional level projects of this kind.
Any organizations from Germany that you can name about, that
organization that we are in touch with or communicating with?
on agricultural project, I think. Yeah.
We are mostly with Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in Berlin. We are communicating with small-scale farmers. For example, there's a farmer in Brandenburg that we work with. She gave trainings in Kurdistan, and we're doing exchange. And at Spoor in Berlin, we met really interesting people. They have a garden there. They were very interested in our project. We're also interested in theirs. And so there's an idea of an exchange. One of my new colleagues here is in the presentation, Asa from Sweden. Sorry, Asa, I'm using your name now. But we're trying to also communicate with farmers and initiatives in Europe, like in Sweden, Scandinavia, and Germany, and hopefully in the US as well. Because there are movements, initiatives around food sovereignty. Hello, Asa. And networks, food sovereignty. Hello. That also we have access to heirloom seeds. So there was a question. Asa can also say something about this. The seeds that we cannot find locally are luckily also are accessible or still found in banks, seed banks around the world that we can also ask for, return them. These were seeds that were saved from really early on as well, and from the 40s on until now, but also farmers and initiatives around Europe and in West Asia as well that have been, planting these seeds, and now they have, large amounts of these seeds that are being exchanged and shared between us. And Asa can say something about this as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Shenah. Yeah, my name is also Sonja's daughter. I'm an artist. I'm also a researcher, an academic researcher, and I'm part of different associations. I'm based in the south of Sweden, but I'm also very connected to the environment in Berlin that you just talked about, Shenah, because I have lived there for many years. But in Sweden, I'm working with an organization, a farmers organization that are custodians of peasant seeds, and especially grains. And many of our grains are very old grains, and I'm sure, I really hope we can have you come here, Shenah. And somehow we could start an exchange to see whether, because what I find so empowering with this farmers organization is that you could eventually find seeds in the gene banks, but they are deep frozen and you can get a very few grams in your hand. But the farmers seed banks, the peasant seed banks here, are like living crops that are healthy, and you can have kilos of them. And so I really hope we could start like a repatriation or rematriation exchange on grains from here. If eventually it is like this, that some seeds here are lost, but we don't know. But I think this kind of mapping, and also just on the level of unmaking certain narratives about, like, what you speak about, there is an idea that everything from West is better and so on. But actually here in the so-called West, farmers also struggle against the homogenized corporate seeds. So it's more nuanced, I think, this whole situation, actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Asa, for opinion. Also, a question about the film. I think it was a really, a powerful film. Unfortunately, we couldn't just, take much of it. And they're asking if there is any link to it. Really, stark colors and some nice scenes that you had there. If you can share the link with us, if there is available online.
Yes, so we have a private link at the moment for people who are interested through you or through Zahra Institute. I can share links and they can watch it, and I cannot recommend this film enough, actually. I mean, it's a great film because of the farmers, because of the stories that they tell. And so I can share the private link with anyone because it just has a password and you can see it.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
And sure, we'll make it soon. We'll make it public, and then we can also share the link again with networks and groups that want to watch it, especially your students as well.
Well, finally, a question on history of, food sovereignty and food colonialism. Maybe we should call, I don't know how you call it. From Mirhat, I was hoping for a question on the historical background of that issue. He's asking if were there any beneficial agricultural policy of Britain when Sawan was in Kurdistan back in 1920s, as he was very much involved with Slemani region. If any, has it been effective or influential in the region in the later years up to 90s?
Again, really, I examined the British archives for different themes for my PhD, and mainly for how the British were sown, especially, or before him, for example, the travelers before the direct colonization, someone like Rich, the kind of so we use them as primary sources, and we mainly in Kurdistan, I don't know about Kurdish studies, is different, scholars are critical, but in Kurdistan these sources are seen as, the Quran, for example, the factual knowledge that was taken from until today, in departments in Kurdistan. They just say, Rich said this, Rich's numbers were this, you know.
Major Son said that, Major Son said that. I said it was really amazing to hear those names around.
Yeah. And I think those are being, for example, I examined them critically. And with agriculture, yes. So in his reports, what Son is reporting back, so did briefly, of course, Sykes, and then, as I mentioned, also Bell and others. It's very brief on agriculture, but they do touch on it. Like, you know, this needs to be done. What we did in India could work here, for example. They talk about water, they talk about tobacco, but directly affecting agricultural laws. I wouldn't say Son directly affected, but the propaganda that is the way they tell poetry and stories in the propaganda in Tegeshni Rasi, then in Peshkot, and then later on in Jianawa. It comes up, it's consecutive, it just continues. And then later on, because as I said, the intellectuals who are writing in Tegeshni Rasi, some of them are then moving to Peshkot and then move to Jianawa and then Jin, some of them. In some phases, for example, Aladdin Sajadi in Jianawa, he's critical of, for example, the British. But then on other topics, when it comes to agriculture, tobacco and cotton, they're touching on similar things, right? That it should be improved, that we are backward, that the people that are illiterate need to be educated. And of course, it was the British who founded the agricultural department, then it becomes agricultural ministry. They are directly affecting it. So it's in parallel with their policies. And then during the monarchy period, it's the same. And then during Abdul Karim Qasim's period, the brief period that Qasim is in power from 58 to 63, there's the agricultural reform law that is introduced in Iraq, which means farmers are given large access back of land and resources, but it's a very brief period. And here some of the laws are being amended, and later on the Baathists actually completely take over agriculture, and its demise because of the internationalization of oil, and oil sector takes over the agriculture. So it's, you know, different periods, different ways of affecting agriculture.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Shenah. It was really amazing to hear, you know, a story from Kurdistan, from Fertile Crescent, you know, that are some of the first knowledge of agricultural landscape in history started from that region, and you brought it all the way to up here. I mean, to see what is the implementations in today and for the future too. So I really wish you success in that amazing project, and I look forward for further discussion on future projects that you will have. Well, thank you for all of you for coming to this interesting speech. Just a reminder about our next talk by Said Brifkani on his novel and on Kurdish stories from an American perspective, which will take place on February 25. Thank you very much again for all. Thank you, Shenah.
Metin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice evening to you all.
Bye-bye.